Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Tim Van Orden, and this is episode 16, The Rediscovered Country. We'll be starting off with some Star Trek news and then discussing Discovery Season 3, Episode 8, The Sanctuary.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, which is the Rediscovered Country, where Star Trek goes back to home and family and roots and seeks, well, sanctuary. Join us. All right. Wow. Episode 16, sir. This is getting real. This is a thing now.
Just wait till we get to episode 20.
I know.
And 25.
I know. What's going to happen? It's a whole vast, mysterious unknown out there. It's like something I feel like
undiscovered
undiscovered
territory?
an unfound land. Oh, yeah. For those of you who don't know, this used to be called the Undiscovered Country Project. And so Tim is making a clever reference, as he usually does, to our past selves. So nice. Hey, so you have Star Trek news, I hear.
I do. I just want to point out, I've got my script up here. And my eyes keep falling on the outro where you say, Tim, what do we have coming up next week? And every time you don't ask me that, I get confused. So I need to move my script away.
Script? What script are you referring to, sir? There is no such thing as a
imaginary
script.
Because this is all live.
It actually is.
Unedited.
The vast majority of it is. We know
off
that.
The cuff.
It's not
Shooting from the hip.
unedited, but it is off the cuff, yeah. So anyway, yeah. Well, that's some Star Trek news right there.
So I have this fancy piece of information that someone just sent me today that I found very interesting, and this item I think is going to go on my Christmas list. Over on treknews.net, there is a review of the Star Trek, The Artistry of Dan Curry, VFX Weapons and Wonders from TNG to Enterprise, the book Star Trek Deserves. Oh, that's the name of the article.
Oh, it's the name of the article, not the book. It'd be funny if that was the name of the book, though. The book Star Trek Deserves. Dude, that's awesome.
Well, it's funny. The title of the article is And Wonders from TNG to Enterprise, but looking at the picture of the book, it just says From TNG to Voyager.
Really?
Yeah, so there might not be any Enterprise in there.
Interesting.
Which is a little disappointing because I really liked the visual look of Enterprise.
I do too, and that was the thing that struck me about Enterprise. Well, that struck me about the Kelvin Timeline film, the first one when I went to see it in the theater, was I was like, wow, this is a really credible 23rd century to follow Enterprise's 22nd century. Because I really felt like Enterprise took us in such a new aesthetic direction for Star Trek. I loved it. Yeah.
I really did too. It kind of got a little bit of a submarine feel.
Yeah.
It was cool.
It was awesome. So yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I love that kind of book, like with illustrations and stuff. And all that sort
lots
of
pretty pictures.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. That is the kind of stuff that just built nerddom when we were younger, when you didn't have like websites to go on and awesome Gospel According to Star Trek podcasts to listen to.
Or Memory Alpha.
Right. Exactly. Man, going through those reference books, that was everything. And they're still great. They're so beautiful. And you get so much information there you won't get anywhere else. And so that's awesome.
Agreed.
I also have a
that's going on my Amazon list for Christmas.
Yeah, I hear that.
So what do you got?
Oh! I have news too, don't I? Okay, this is cool.
So I hear.
I'm really excited about this.
All right, hit me.
There is first of all, there are two. It's like two news articles in one. But one of them is that there is an upcoming Star Trek Voyager documentary. Janeway news.
I heard about that.
We gotta have the Janeway news. And it could be out in 2021, so that's exciting. But the piece that this is mentioned in that is what drew my eye is that David Zappone, who was the producer of the Deep Space Nine documentary What We Left Behind, said that there could be a spin-off of that documentary. That like a more like kind of a bonus documentary
Of the DS9
of Deep Space, yeah, for Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make that clear. But he says we're working on it now. It's in the writers' room, and it will also include some of the interviews and things that we shot that couldn't make it into what we left behind. And
so it's what we left out of what we left behind.
What we left out of what we left behind. That's good. Yeah, that's great. I like it. That's what they should call it. We should get in touch with David Zappone and let him know. We got it solved for you, sir. But yeah, he says they're really in the creative stage, but because people seem really happy with it, they thought, well, we might do something else. He says, I think we can be doing What We Left Behind sequels for the next 10 years, which I can imagine. But anyway, that excites me. I was just talking with interesting. I was just talking with a friend of mine the other day about how influential Deep Space Nine is. And like the Star Trek we have today is so much because of Deep Space Nine.
Absolutely.
It's so important, and I still contend. I mean, I don't think about the new stuff yet because it hasn't had the years on it that the other stuff has. Mm-hmm. But pre Kurtzman era, I really believe Deep Space Nine is the most consistently well written series in Star Trek, and writing is everything in Star Trek. So that's just a lot about the series.
And it really opened the door. It gave people permission to do something different with Star Trek and to not have to just do the TNG TOS formula.
Yes, and that is the order of the day. And the great thing about it is that it shows that it's perhaps even more important, and you maybe even do a better job of preserving the core of what Star Trek is meant to be when you tell more complex, complicated, morally muddy stories. Mm-hmm. Because that's I think that's beautiful, and that's what we're seeing in present Star Trek, and it makes me happy. Yep. So hooray for Deep Space Nine.
Indeed.
But we're not here to talk about Deep Space Nine, are we?
No, we're not.
Not DS9, but DSC.
I mean, we might be here to talk about Deep Space Nine.
We never know. Deep Space Nine,
depending on what the main topic becomes.
I don't know what you're talking about, sir. See, like on one part of the show, I'm like trying to deny that this is scripted at all, and then the other part of the show, I'm trying to deny that we're making this up as we go. So, so basically, I can't decide how I want that to happen.
Can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah. Once loved two girls at a time. Kate and Edith both were mine. I learned that what they say is true. You can't have Kate and Edith too. So. Anyway.
That was pretty good. At first, I was wondering where you were going with that.
You
started off with "once loved two girls at the same time." I'm like, what?
No, that's an old song by a comedian juggler guy called Michael Davis.
Okay,
I saw him on the Johnny Carson show years ago and recorded it and just watched it over and over.
Johnny Carson show. We're not that old.
Carson, yes, we are. I mean, no, we're not.
Really?
Yeah, we are.
Oh man,
you grew up on Carson just like I did.
No, I never watched Carson.
You never watched Carson?
No.
Come on, Carson was everything.
No, I was sheltered.
Oh, okay, all right. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
I was less sheltered. I'm not gonna say I wasn't
know.
Sheltered,
How old were you when you
sheltered.
got to watch Last Temptation?
Oh, I was like 16.
Good night.
Well, it's an R-rated film. You got to be 17 to see it. I mean, come on.
Man, my parents would not let me watch R-rated films even with them.
It's a Jesus movie. I mean, I'd seen RoboCop for goodness sakes.
Oh yeah, no, I had to sneak that one. I still didn't ever see it all the way through.
You know what? I don't know that I had seen RoboCop. In all honesty, I really don't know for sure. But I remember I'd go to parties and people were watching I remember one time I went to a party and they were watching that Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Commando, and I was like, I wanted to leave the room because of all the graphic violence and stuff.
Oh yeah, I was disturbed. I think one of the first serious R-rated films I ever saw was Pulp Fiction.
Oh,
went over to a friend's house. We were having a group gathering, and I went there, and I'm like, what the heck is going on?
You just dove right in, sir.
Yeah, and I couldn't stand Pulp Fiction for years because of that. And I finally watched it again, and I was like, this is kind of good.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. And that's the thing. Like, it's, and you go through this, I go through this as a parent, trying to think about what your kid's ready to see and what they're not ready to see. Because you don't want them to have that experience where, like, they see something and it puts them off. And you're like, no, this is great. You need to love this.
Right?
So, yeah, it's true. So anyway, what are we talking about? Oh, yeah, this is a Star Trek podcast. I forgot.
Not a Days of Yore podcast.
Not a what it's like to grow up in Christian America podcast, although it is a little bit of that. What did you think of Star Trek Discovery, Season 3, Episode 8, The Sanctuary?
There we go.
Well, I was like, I'm going to make it through. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I got to be honest. It was a little disappointing for me from start to finish. I felt like there was just a lot of filler. Like just as we were about to go to the center of the burn, we get, dragged off to go deal with Book's planet. And the whole scenario there just felt kind of contrived to me, just to kind of introduce the villain, who was very, very lackluster for me. I was not impressed with her at all. She was evil for evil's sake. Oh, I'm so sorry I killed your dad, nephew. Now I must kill you, for mine is an evil laugh. Mwahaha. Yeah, I didn't care for her one bit. Okay. And not in a, how like you love to hate Q sort of a way, but just in sort of a not impressed.
Yeah, I understand that. That's fine. Well, and I have my thing with the Orion characters, and it really solidified for me with this episode because I watched it twice.
Okay.
Is their look. I have the feeling that the makeup artist is using prosthetics on like their foreheads and noses instead of painting their skin green, because their faces look so plastic.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't know what they were doing to it, but they looked more fake in this than they did in TOS.
Yeah, they look like doll faces. It's really weird. It's
and maybe that's
creepy.
why I didn't care for Horizon. Osira, thank you.
Yeah, well,
Horizons.
I think that does undermine the effectiveness of the characters a little bit. I honestly feel they look a little cartoonish. They look like doll faces. They don't have a lot of expression.
Oh, they're trying to compete with Lower Decks. Looking cartoonish.
Cartoonish. That's funny. Yeah, so I don't know. I hate to say something like that because I really respect the work that the makeup artist for the series has been doing. Yeah. I hate to say that something like that doesn't work for me, but so far it hasn't worked for me. We'll see. But I don't have the problems narratively that you do. I feel like it was really great. I am glad that we just got a tidbit of the burn mystery because that's all we need. The episode was about the characters and the things that various characters overcame, the transitions that various characters went through, and sort of ways that they showed courage, rose to the occasion, took risks, and grew. And we learned more about all these different characters, got to see people functioning in new roles, and there was a lot of comedy, and there was a lot of pathos, and I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was great. Well,
I certainly enjoyed Saru trying to come up with his catchphrase.
Oh, and I thought of you. I thought of you during that scene because did you notice Tilly's display that she had up? And
I'm sure I did at the time, but I can't remember.
Well, okay, so they're walking down the hall, and she has her TRICOM badge display up, and in the middle of it, it says PAD, PADD. Like they're still using that, and every time I think of you every time I think of pads.
Oh,
so, yeah. I was like, it's still a pad.
Yes.
Yep. So, but yes, that was a great scene. I loved it. And Saru trying to get his catchphrase sorted.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was good. I liked, so like a lot of times in TNG, if anyone ever gets to listen to our old audio commentaries, you'll hear me complain about the episode felt like it needed another one or two episodes to kind of stretch out and form everying.
Right, to tell the
This
whole
was
story.
an episode that I felt was stretched too much. It could have stood the TNG treatment.
Really?
Like, yeah, like the third or fourth scene where Giorgio is just insulting everybody and how much she can kill them 10 times over and everything, I was just like, all right, enough already. We get it. She's distressed. She's lashing out. Move on. It's just that there was a lot with this episode. Like, I didn't hate it, but there was a lot that just left me kind of, all right, we get it. Move on. Let's go. It really felt like filler to me. And I was not terribly impressed with Book's brother.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the acting there just didn't do anything for me. He was a little stiff. And I felt like the end was really, it was almost too TNG predictable. Like, of course they're going to get together and make up and you combine their powers to form Captain Planet and send all the microbes away. Of course that's how it had to end. I don't know. The episode just didn't really jibe for me.
Okay. All right. Well, usually when I ask you what you think of the episode, you're like, it's good. And I'm like, dude, you got to give me some reaction. And now you're giving me some reaction. So there we go. Be
careful what you wish for.
I guess so. Man, I don't know. I've seen it twice. I loved all of it. I didn't have a problem with anything.
Well, I'm happy for you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I didn't,
blind sheep.
I mean, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, there were three scenes with Giorgio, and yes, she was herself in all three scenes. I don't find that to be a problem. The more horrid she is to people, the more she's obviously struggling with stuff and fronting about it. And
it was just
that shows her vulnerability.
We didn't get anything from showing us that 3 times. Like the first time, okay, yeah, I get it, I understand, but 3 times I feel like was beating it with a dead horse.
Well, we advanced the plot. First, you have the consultation, right, where we set up that they're going to do something with her. You can't have her walk into the med bay ready to go through a procedure. You have to set that up. So we have the consultation between her and Hugh. So we see how Hugh handles her and how he won't let her get to him and will play her game by not playing her game. Will shut her down and move forward and not, let her get under his skin so that she will end up agreeing to the procedure. Then we see the procedure itself, which gives us another look at 32nd century medicine, which we haven't gotten to see a lot of. Gives us more interplay between Hugh and Giorgio, and we start to have, and I guess that scene is kind of cut into, and then we cut back to it where she's going through the procedure, and we see more of those flashbacks, and we see how it affects her. We see her wake up and scream and all that, and then get out, and then she's going to sneak a look at information on her own, which is how she operates. So of course she does. And then we move on, and then we have her breaking into the computer system, being Giorgio, breaking into the computer system, finding stuff out about herself, and then she and Hugh move on to talk about her stuff privately, which we'll get more of later. We'll get more of her story later. I felt all that moved the plot along, and it was all interesting. So, yeah.
Well, that's fair. You are entitled to your wrong opinion.
Okay. Well,
I just thought it could have all been condensed. It was unnecessarily stretched out, in my opinion. I liked the interplay between Colbert and Giorgio. That was I did like the way he handled her really well. Yes. And what they were trying to do in conveying her distress, they did well. I picked up on that. It was just stretched out for me.
Okay. I didn't feel like it was any different than we would have handled it in TNG, just cutting back and forth between the process of the medical procedure. I've seen that so many times with Crusher, and I don't know, it just seemed normal. But anyway, that is what it is. What about Kayla?
Oh, flying the ship?
Yeah.
No, that was good. That I enjoyed.
I loved that.
That was very good.
And that was one of those thematic moments in the episode too. One of those moments that, of course, we've been wanting to get back to Kayla. We've been wanting to see more of her character development. Mm-hmm. And I loved seeing her, earlier in the episode, she had rigged her controls at her station.
Yeah.
So
to get back to she was getting antsy and needed a safety net.
Yes.
Her safety blanket.
And then, and you can see that's because she doesn't trust herself.
Right.
And I mean, that's part of her process in all of this. And so then when she's on Book's ship, and she says, what does she say? Oh yeah. She says, if you face something, you can beat it. It felt like a more aggressive version of what I usually say, which is anything mentionable is manageable.
Mm-hmm. It was the cocky fighter pilot version.
Yes, exactly. And that's the kind of thing, which is really interesting because in that conversation that she had with Hugh back in the previous episode where she admitted that she's not okay, they talked about how tough it is for her to admit that because fighter pilots are so macho, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, they use that word again to refer to her and to refer to fighter pilots being macho at the end of the episode. But it was that attitude, right, that actually helped her in this case. That actually helped her. Because when she's saying, when you face something, you can beat it, she's not just talking about the problem that's in front of her outside her view screen, right? She's talking about the problem that's within her, and she's talking about the problem that's within Rin, and how Rin is needing to confront his own fears. So I love that. I love the cat. I love
Grudge.
Greatness. It was beautiful, but it was great to see Kayla, really facing and really trusting herself and relying on herself, and going back to her roots. I think, we've talked about this before. I think it was in People of Earth about the importance of rootedness, groundedness. That's one of the things, I'm doing the Advent series right now. Just did the second one this Sunday. And, I don't come from a liturgical background, but a lot of people in our place, our kind of post-evangelical place, are reaching back to those older traditions for that sense of rootedness, for that sense of being a part of something that's older than us, being a part of something that's bigger than us.
Yeah, there's absolutely something special. Every time I take communion, thinking about how Christians have been doing this for the last 2,000 years.
Yeah.
It connects you to history. It connects you. I mean, obviously we're connected to Jesus, but it connects you to Jesus,
Yeah, and that's the whole point, right? And it's not only something that Christians have been doing for a long time, but it's instituted by Jesus. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really cool. to put it very theologically. But and we've talked before too about the difference between like Catholics and Protestants and things. Like one of the ways that I disagree with my Catholic brothers and sisters in Jesus is that I don't believe in transubstantiation. For those listening who may not know that, what that is, it is a Catholic doctrine that says that the communion, wafer, and wine literally become the body and blood of Jesus. That it looks and feels like bread or wafer. It looks and feels and smells and tastes like wine. Those are its accidents. Its essence is the body and blood of Christ, the literal body and blood of Christ. And that is why it is a sacrament or a salvific act to take the communion. I do not believe in that at all. And I have my reasons for not believing in that. And it's fine if you do. That's totally fine. The thing I'm getting to is I went to see John Michael Talbot, who I love, one of my favorite musicians, and he was in a Catholic church. I'd seen him a few times, and this was the first time I've seen him in a Catholic church. And he was talking about transubstantiation, and he was talking about how much that means to him. And he says, I think about that I'm encountering the real presence of Jesus. And his words were, and I'm just jello. He talked about how much it meant to him to encounter Christ in communion. And it occurred to me that like it doesn't matter that John and I have completely different understandings of what's happening in communion.
Mm-hmm.
The essence, again, it kind of goes back to that concept of accidents and essence. Like the essence that we are both talking about is the same thing, which is the communion is something that is supposed to bring us into an encounter with Jesus, exactly like you're talking about. And that's what any liturgical practice, anything like that is old and storied, and ingrained in tradition that we can connect with, can help us connect with our past, can help us connect with Christ, can help us connect with the Spirit, connect with our own histories, our own cultures, even outside of just Christian practice, but whatever other practices we might have. Here we are at Christmas time as we're recording this. And there are a lot of family traditions and things that may not necessarily be connected to theology or anything like that are also important and help us be grounded in who we are and where we come from. So,
okay.
But anyway, that's a long walk, but it all comes back to the fact that Kayla, she says, this is how I learned to fly. And I think there's something powerful about that, coming back to where we come from, that helps us find ourselves when we're lost. So remember that. If you're out there and you're trying to find yourself, you may find yourself someplace where you used to find yourself. Sometimes we encounter those things and we say, oh, it doesn't fit anymore. And then if we analyze that experience and ask ourselves why it doesn't fit, the answer to that question is sometimes a part of the answer to where we are and who we are and where we belong. So there you go. Thanks, Kayla.
Yeah, right.
So another thing that I liked about this episode was the story between Book and his brother. Sorry, I can't remember the brother's name just now. I should have looked it up before we started recording. I didn't. There you go.
Because we're off the cuff.
Because we're totally scripted here. But I loved, it was one of those Star Trek moments when we encounter and engage with something mystical, right? Something that's kind of that's almost a prayer-like thing, an incantation, right? They're saying these words. There's a even in the first episode of the season, we see Book use his empathic abilities, and Michael asks him, "Were you praying?" And he's like, "Sort of," And there's a lot of sort of praying so far in this season,
right?
With eye and all of that. One eye, we're not pirates, which I loved that came up in this episode again. But anyway, but anyway, we have this kind of mystical moment. I think of the Traveler in Next Generation, or Chakotay with his Okuchimura in Voyager. There are or Star Trek 3 with the ritual on Vulcan to restore Spock's soul to his body. There are all these things that people do in Star Trek that connect with something that we can't necessarily scientifically explain, or maybe we can, but we also can't escape that there's something more to it, right? There's a different kind of consciousness. There's a different kind of space that we have to go into in order to make this thing happen. And I loved seeing the Enterprise as a part of that. It reminded me of actually Encounter at Farpoint, when this whole the great thing about that as a premiere episode for a new Star Trek series is they spend this whole episode and they have all these opportunities to use violence, and they don't. And then at the end of the episode, they use this really powerful ship of theirs to just beam down energy to give this life form the energy it needs to escape its prison, right? And it reminded me very much of that when that beam was coming down from Discovery to amplify the signal, to move the sea locusts back to the sea. I thought that was really beautiful, and it especially because we're in the Advent season again, and one of the things that's on my mind is peace, and it just felt like this peaceful peaceful rain, this what's the word? Like this flow of peace, right? Coming down to the planet and spreading peace through the planet, through this devotional act, through this meditative act. And it was spiritual, and it was beautiful.
The Holy Spirit will descend upon you.
Yeah, right. The Holy Spirit descending on the day of Pentecost. Yeah, it's very much something like that. That's good. It's a good visual kind of feeling of something like that. I mean, yes, there's sciencey stuff going on. We know that.
Yeah.
You know, we're not. But this is what I say all the time. It doesn't matter if something is natural. It doesn't matter if something is scientific. It doesn't matter if we can say, oh yeah, the atoms are doing this and the molecules are doing that, or this chemical is reacting with that chemical, or, dopamine is being released in your brain, or whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter. The fact is that the meaning can still be there, and it's no less sacred, because this whole earth and this whole universe and everything that we have the ability to do to make technology, to make science happen, to explore and to understand and manipulate the world around us, that's all a gift from God. That all comes from God. There is nothing in this universe that does not belong to God, that does not come from God, that is not part of God's design. As Abraham Kuyper said, there's not a square inch of all creation over which Christ does not cry, mine. And that's very important to me, the sacredness of the everyday and the ordinary, and those things that we could write off as just atoms, Well, sure. A house is just atoms. Music is just vibration. You and I are just cells, but that doesn't make us less than what we are. That means we are more than the sum of our parts.
I think as you say that, it reminds me of Star Trek V, and I think it kind of hits on why that film is one of my favorites. It's because they're trying, I don't know, I don't want to say they're trying to quantify the unquantifiable, but it's a very Star Trek mix of science and the unexplainable, and I can't put my finger on it, but I think that's a big part of why I like Star Trek V so much.
And I'm liking it more. The more we talk about it, and the more I meditate on just how much I despise Into Darkness. But
it helps to have a couple below it that
it does. It does.
And Insurrection.
Insurrection is not my favorite, but you know what? I like Insurrection better than Into Darkness. I think Into Darkness is at the bottom for me. I really do, because Insurrection at least feels like an episode of TNG, and that's not bad. Even if it's a recycled episode of TNG, it still feels more like Star Trek than Into Darkness.
Right.
But yeah, Star Trek V, yeah, right. I think there's something. Again, it's this ineffable thing, and it keeps happening in Star Trek. It happens, in our human experience. But there's this ineffable thing that happens when Star Trek goes searching for God, goes searching for the divine. It happens over and over and over. We can't escape it. People who say that Star Trek is all science aren't paying attention. And I really believe, I can't escape this belief. I would love to reason it away. But I really believe it's because of the mindset of Gene Roddenberry in creating Star Trek. I think somehow that sensibility that he had of the divine that animates the universe, even though his vision of the divine was different from yours and mine probably, and might be different from other people's, I think that undergirded his vision, came through in his work and in the work of his fellows, whether he wanted it to or not. And I think that's just in Star Trek's DNA. And when Star Trek is really being Star Trek, it is reaching for something transcendent. And I think this episode does that in more than one place. But certainly there. So I don't know. It's one of those things. It's like, I can't explain that, but there it is. I think it's there. I think it's endemic to the whole project.
Well, I mean, Star Trek has already answered that question, though, right? Isn't the universe on the back of a a hamster mole or something. I can't remember now.
The universe is balanced on the back of a giant koala. Why is he smiling? What does he know? Oh, man. And my question is, how do you know it's a he?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's still one of my favorite lines in Star Trek. I love that. Oh, boy. Anyway, so what else do we have in this episode that we should talk about? Oh, another one of those best lines that is up there with the koala line. Thank you for mentioning the koala line because it brought this to my mind. Mm-hmm. His name is Linus, and you can peel off a piece of his face if you want to.
I wonder if that was actually scripted. And the kid was all like, cool.
Oh, that was awesome.
That was brilliant.
And it's funny because I think the kid knew the line was coming because he reaches up and tries to take something off of Sonequa's face, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful. That was so funny. It was set up with such a throwaway gag, at the beginning of the thing about Linus, staying out of the mess hall as long as he's shedding.
Yep.
Which that is, by the way, a great scene between Saru and Tilly.
Yes.
That was gorgeous. And it
was, gosh, was this the episode? So in the ready room for like the second episode, she had mentioned something about where she starts to become, later in the season, she starts to become defensive of Saru.
Protective,
yes. Yeah. And I think this was when Rin
comes in.
Rin walks in and she's like, speak to him with the respect he deserves. Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah, that was great. Okay, that's great on a couple levels because Rin comes in and he's like, which one of you is the captain? He's like, try that again.
Yeah.
and with the respect, that is due the rank. And Rin asks again, but the funny thing about that is the actor playing Rin is Mary Wiseman's husband. So really. So her first act of like, excuse me, you will respect the captain, like putting somebody in their place. It's her husband.
Nice.
I thought that was brilliant.
That's hilarious. That's awesome.
Yeah. Great. Mary Wiseman was just pitch perfect in this episode. I loved the way she played that scene with Saru. It was gorgeous. So I do want to mention one other thing because that one of my favorite people in this cast now is Blu del Barrio. Mm-hmm. I absolutely love them. It was probably that interview that I read before I had ever seen them, in a single scene.
Yeah.
In the series. That interview I just found completely charming, and I was like, this is exactly how I would be if I was cast in Star Trek, especially as a teenager.
Can you link that article? Can you put it down in the doobly-doo?
Yeah, I did on the episode when we on the third episode of the podcast. I linked that article, but I can link it again. It was an interview with Glad, I think, and they were just charming as anything, and I just loved it. I think it was on StarTrek.com. I think linked to it, and so I was like, oh, new cast member, and so I was checking that out. But anyway, I have a very warm, happy place in my heart for Blu del Barrio and therefore for the character of Adira. Mm-hmm. Which makes me feel bad for Ian Alexander. And if you watch the Ready Room episode, I think you can see that Blu gets a little bit more love than Ian from Will as well. But I do want to say something about that scene. The scene, okay? The scene when Adira says, they're fast. Mm-hmm. And tells Stamets, no, I really would prefer if you referred to me as they from now on and not she. I want to dial in on that for just a second, because I would really encourage anybody who doesn't understand that experience to view that scene and view it again if you need to. Because Blu del Barrio is non-binary, And one of the reasons their character was referred to as she up to that point was that Blu del Barrio was in the process of coming out as non-binary. And when they're playing that scene, that's a thing that they were actually doing in their real life at that time. The emotional process, the fear, the nervousness, the getting up the courage, all that you see from the moment Stamets refers to them as she, until they wait for Saru and Tilly to leave the room and then go to their station and kind of gulp it down and say, they're fast. I think that might show just what a big deal it is for someone to ask to be referred to a certain way. Mm-hmm. Just what a big deal it is for someone to come out in some sense for the first time. And how much it means to them to be able to do that. I've seen it over and over, and I know in that scene that you're seeing Blue's actual experience reflected in their performance. And Paul's response is so important because he says, okay. And That's it. And that's all that has to be said about it. And then Adira says, and I've never told anybody but Gray. And I want you to imagine how that scene would have gone for that character if Stamets had objected. If Stamets had wrinkled his nose and said, well, that's weird. If Stamets had done something to try to tell Adira about their own body, about their own identity, about their own experience, about which he knows relatively little. And then to find out this was an enormous act of courage, this was an enormous act of trust on the part of Adira to say this to him. Mm-hmm. And
it was a moment of vulnerability for her, and that's
absolutely
important.
It's two things at the same time. It's vulnerability and strength at the same time, which we've talked about for the past couple of episodes. It's a very vulnerable moment. It's a scary moment, but it takes.
I guess, it makes me think of Georgiou actually, and the juxtaposition there. They're both feeling vulnerable.
Yes,
but Adira opens up and trusts and finds courage to do that, whereas Georgiou, I think, retreats to her fear and lashes out and tries to push away.
And so between the two of them, that's an excellent point, because between the two of them, Georgiou appears weaker than Adira, the little teenage human, right? And it is an act of assertiveness that is difficult to muster, and it's an act of vulnerability at the same time. And folks, I just need to tell you, you don't know, you might know what that's like. You might be able, if you hear it in those terms, you might be able to relate it to some experience in your life where you've had to say something or do something. I think of it like being a Star Trek fan. You know? Right?
There comes a point in every nerd's relationship where they have to break it to their significant other that they like Star Trek.
Right, exactly. I go back to that old SNL sketch from like 1986 where Kirk is where Bill Shatner is playing himself, a comic version of himself, at a Star Trek convention, and they're all these nerds in their Star Trek pajamas, and he's like, and he says, "Get a life," Bill Shatner wrote a book called Get a Life, he's like, "Get a life, get out of your mother's basements," and all that kind of stuff. That very much reflects, you literally, like the first day you show up at school wearing a Star Trek shirt, or in your Starfleet uniform on Halloween or whatever, is the first day you risk getting beat up. It's not necessarily the case now, but it sure has been. Mm-hmm. So nerds know something about that.
Now, let's be clear. We're not trying to equate liking Star Trek with something as deep and personal as gender identity.
No, not at all. Although I think for many of us, liking Star Trek is deep and personal. But that act of doing something public that reflects something that you've kept private is something that anybody can relate to.
Yeah.
Whether it goes as deep as part of your identity or not, right? And different things can be that for different people. So I wouldn't want to equate them, but neither would I want to say that being a Star Trek fan couldn't be that important to you, because it certainly could. But so the point of all that is just to say, Paul reacts in exactly the right way. And just think about how that scene would have unfolded if he had reacted any differently. How much he would have hurt Adira. And how ruined that relationship would be. And so keep in mind that even if it makes you uncomfortable, whether it's somebody's gender or somebody's name or somebody's religion or whatever it is, just showing simple, basic respect. I think that's the Christian thing to do. I think that's loving your neighbor. And I think it's the better choice. I think it's the higher road. And I think it's respectful of other people's feelings and of other people's processes and of other people's humanity. And we respect other people's humanity. Why, class? Because humanity is the imago Dei. It is the image of God. And when we respect one another, we respect that we all reflect God in our humanity. And we're respecting, we're honoring the image of God in that other human, however they come to us. So don't let your fear and your discomfort get in the way of showing respect to others, because the harm you can do is incredible and immense. But the other side of that is the good you can do is great. Because just saying okay and respecting somebody's request can mean a huge amount to them. It means a huge amount to them. And yeah, it's an act of love to do that. So that was on my mind because Blu del Barrio and Ian Alexander were Will Wheaton's guests on this. I keep wanting to say issue when I mean episode, and episode when I mean issue, on this edition of the Ready Room. I'll just go with a third way there. But yeah, so Blu and Ian were guests on there, and it was a gorgeous episode for me because folks, if you're not watching The Ready Room, you need to be watching it. Will Wheaton is just like my hero right now. I cannot tell you how cool it is to see him for his job nerding out over his fellow and being family with his Star Trek family. It just means the world to me to see him. He's roughly my age, roughly our age, you know. Yeah. And when we were kids, we were meant to identify with him in Star Trek. You know, he was a kid on screen, and he was meant to draw us in. Some of us he did, some of us he didn't. But like, yeah, we all wanted to be that kid who got to be on the bridge of the Enterprise. You know, I remember the cereal box that offered that had the contest for a walk-on role on Next Generation, and I wanted to do that so badly. And now to see Will and to recognize him as a peer, you know, to see myself in him, like, oh, hey, you grew a beard too. What's up? You know, maybe we'll fake people out and they'll realize they won't realize we're still kids. Like to see that, and it's just, I don't know. It means so much to me. It's so great. And I think he's such an ambassador for Star Trek. And this one was particularly great for me because he's talking to these people who are, he says, part of a very small club of like 4 people who were teenagers on Star Trek, like regular cast members, you know. And to see that connection with him, you know, was so great and was so important. And I was talking with a friend and I was like, I really enjoyed the Star Trek episode, but what I loved was the Ready Room. Like the Ready Room was huge. I just loved it. Because there's something about Will, like when he had Jonathan on, and, you know, just the way he connects with his guests and just how proudly he nerds.
Oh man, I missed that episode with Will Riker.
Oh, Jonathan
Or
Frakes? Yeah.
Jonathan Frakes. I mean, yeah. I need to
You
go
need
back
to
and
watch
watch
it.
that
You
one.
need to watch it. It's so good. It's just great to see the connection between them. It's wonderful. And oh, Jonathan directed this episode as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So just
Yeah,
great.
I remember seeing that.
Yeah. Every time I see Jonathan's name in the opening credits, I'm like, yay! But anyway, so I highly recommend people do that because I just feel like Will Wheaton is out there embodying what it means to be a nerd in the best possible sense. And you see him really connecting with his roots, going back, kind of going home in a lot of senses, by reconnecting with Star Trek and his joy through Discovery, kind of reigniting, if it needed to be reignited, his love of Star Trek. And that transitions us. You see what I did there?
Rediscovery.
His rediscovery.
Yeah, I do see that.
Yeah.
That's clever.
Thank you very much.
It's almost like we're not scripted.
I know. It's really good.
People are going to be so confused. They're going to have no idea whether we're really scripted or not now.
I think it's pretty clear we're not for the most part, but yeah. So that brings us, I think, to our theme for today, which is Rediscovered Country. The Rediscovered Country, as opposed to the Undiscovered Country.
Right.
So the Rediscovered Country, what struck us as we went through this episode was the way different characters in this Discovery episode were rediscovering their roots, connecting back with where they come from, and what makes them who they are. And that extends to, it started with Kayla Detmer and her return to how she learned to fly. But then it also goes to Book and his return to his home planet, his return to his brother, and that connectedness and that rootedness, that orientation. We talk so much in this series about the disorientation and the disconnection and how we reconnect and how we root ourselves. And we had that conversation earlier about communion and so many of the liturgical things that we use to ground ourselves as Christians in our faith. And so we thought we'd talk a little bit about some other places in Star Trek, some other characters, some other places who have gone back to their roots, gone back to where they came from, tried to re-engage sort of their home culture, if you will. And often in similar ways to the way Book does, in a ceremonial sense and in a ritualistic sense, and how that theme has carried on throughout Star Trek. So the first place I think of that, and I'm going to throw you a curveball, is Amok Time, when Spock has to return to Vulcan. And of course there's the whole weird mating ritual thing and all that stuff. But it was the first time we got to see Vulcan, and it established the Vulcan people as a ritualistic, and I'll just go ahead and say religious people. Whether they're theists or not, in the novels they are, whether they are theists or not is not as important as it is that even in their logic, I think they find it logical to have a spirituality, to have a religion, to have ritual. And it's through that Spock connects with his Vulcan heritage. And that is, I think, the first instance of this sort of thing. But we see it a lot. And Tim, one of the things that you had mentioned was Picard.
Yes. After he's had the this incredibly traumatic experience of being assimilated, mm-hmm. and he needs to rediscover who he is. Mm-hmm. He goes back to his place of origin, right? The vineyards of France. Right.
And he goes back again to his brother.
Yes.
Echoes of this week's Discovery episode. And that's so important for him too. And again, I mean, literally talking about being grounded, literally with him and Robert fighting in the mud, right? Mm-hmm. Like getting into, like, knocking over the grapevines, to have out their conflict and to get to the root of their issues in that way. There's something about that. There's something about returning to where we come from and confronting with that. And I think a lot of us too are going to be experiencing that particular kind of returning to where we come from in the coming weeks or months. So particularly at this time, as we're recording this in December, a lot of us are going to be having that return to where we come from by going and seeing our families who maybe we haven't seen in a while. Now we might not be because of pandemic issues, mm-hmm. and that can be very disorienting. And my hope, and this is one of the reasons I do the Advent podcasts, and I hope you're listening to them every Sunday during Advent. And if you're not, you can catch up. They're short. They max out at like 15 minutes. But my hope in doing that is to help us find a place to feel grounded and connected. And sometimes we do that through connecting with family. And sometimes that connection can be really hard. Picard and Robert are at odds. And it's difficult for them to fight and work through their stuff. But they do work through their stuff. And we can work through our stuff. I think that's a hopeful image of family conflict. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people would say, oh, they're in a stressful place. Don't get them around their family and get them worked up, because they need to avoid stress. But going through that conflict and saying hard things to one another helped him confront the hard things that he was avoiding at that time.
It's almost as if home is like a sanctuary where you can say what you need to without quite as much fear of reprisal.
It should be.
Right.
It often is not.
That's fair.
And there again, with the discussion we had with Adira earlier in the episode, it often is not.
But in their case, Discovery has become their sanctuary.
Their sanctuary. Very good. Boy, we're still unpacking the Discovery episode. We're supposed to be in the other part of the episode.
Right.
This is good. Yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely. So where do we find sanctuary? Boy, that's
and where does sanctuary find us? Mm-hmm. Because as you keep talking about, as we've been talking about, Worf and his culture and Picard going back and Book going back, I keep coming back to B'Elanna Torres.
Tell me about this, please.
In Voyager. Now, Voyager itself is just a giant series on going home, right? And their whole shtick is about going home and being true to who they are and finding out who that is and, taking the Maquis and the Federation and finding the common ground and that they're realizing they're all part of the same family as they try and get home. Mm-hmm. But B'Elanna in particular, she pushes back against her heritage so much. But I'm thinking of and I don't have quite the episode recall that you do these days, but I'm thinking of the episode where she has to she's going down onto the ship of the damned to fight for her mother, and she's forced to embrace all of this Klingon heritage, right? It's like for so many people, it's something that they have rebelled against, pushed away against, and it's something that she wants no part of. And but she learns what it means to her. It defines where she came from, and it's an integral part of her, and that she can't just pretend it never happened.
Mm-hmm. Right. Barge of the Dead is the name of the episode and the name of the ship. But yes, and that's a great episode, and it's absolutely true. B'Elanna is on a different kind of journey than Worf is, because Worf is constantly trying to embrace his Klingon heritage. It's almost like the duality between Spock and Data. Mm-hmm. Worf is trying to be a really strict Klingon, and he's kind of a traditionalist, right? And B'Elanna is trying to rebel against tradition. And Worf finds, and I think just like Spock and Data also find balance within themselves, I think Worf finds balance by going through crises of faith and questioning some of those traditions and growing out of them, but also letting them grow with him, which many of us I can relate to in our processes of our faith. But B'Elanna, I think, has done herself, as you so well said, I think she's done herself a disservice of trying to truncate her identity by cutting herself off from where she comes from. And this again is why it's so important for us to conduct ourselves with kindness and respect and gentleness toward other people. Paul talks about this actually in Scripture. He says to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy toward all people. And that may seem counterintuitive in our present context, where I think we're so focused on power and holding power and gaining power. I think that's why so many of my comments can sound so anti-religious.
Yeah.
because religion as we know it, at least in our culture, in our country, in our time, has become so focused on that. And that's the very opposite of what Jesus calls us to. That's the very opposite of what Paul calls us to there in that passage. And one of the big reasons is that's so important is that look at the damage that has been done to B'Elanna because of how rejected she felt by her culture. You know, Worf is different. I mean, he sort of sacrificially accepted rejection later on, right?
Right.
But B'Elanna kind of grew up with it. And look at the damage that has done to her and how she is so broken in her relationship to her own heritage. And, you know, what a great gift that episode, that Barge of the Dead episode is for her. What a great experience that is for her to go through. Again, a very hard thing and a struggle. But reconnecting with who she is by finding value in the places that rejected her. That's a really, really hard thing to do. I've had friends who have been very damaged by churches, who've been very hurt by church leadership, who have been in church leadership, who have been in churches where church leadership has ostracized them and has hurt them and has rejected them. And it's difficult for them to walk into a church building. It's difficult for them sometimes to open up a Bible. Man, we really have to think about whether we want people to hurt when they think about Jesus, or whether we want people to feel good and have peace when they think about Jesus. So I think B'Elanna is a really fascinating example of returning to her roots in this way, and can we help one another encounter our roots in a life-giving way, go back through, sift through the things that damaged us, like Bono says, looking for the baby Jesus under the trash. I think a lot of times we're doing that at Christmas time. Where we can find something that would inform us and would heal us in our relationship to God, in our relationship to our families and our cultures. That's a hard thing to do, and B'Elanna is a good example of that. What else do we have?
Well, I was thinking, kind of to take it back to Picard going back to the vineyard. There's almost too much that you can do, though, right? Because Picard, he goes home and he tries to stay home.
Yeah.
And home tells him where he rediscovers himself. He realizes, no, it is home, but he belongs on the Enterprise. Kind of like we were talking a few episodes ago about the difference between fitting in and belonging. He can fit in at home just fine, right?
Right.
But he belongs on the Enterprise.
Yep. Well, and Book says something very similar in this episode of Discovery, where he says his planet is still home. But the Discovery and the Federation are doing work to try to protect planets like his, and he wants to be a part of that, Very true. Very true. And, some of us might find that we end up returning to places where we had left before. Or we might find that we're rescuing something from those places, or rescuing something of ourselves by confronting those things. Like Kayla said, if you can face it, you can beat it. Anything that's mentionable is manageable, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to isolate ourselves, to cut off relationship with family, and sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes it's deeply unhealthy and abusive, and you have to get away. And
Sure.
I'm yes, that's fine. But sometimes we're just letting hurt fester. We're leaving things unresolved because it's just hard to work through. Mm-hmm. And if we'll do that hard work, I think that can be a beautiful thing. That can be a healing thing for us. We can find that sanctuary, that sacred space again. Sometimes we can't find it until we reconcile with those parts of ourselves that we have cut ourselves off from, or that have or that we felt cut off by,
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate the work that a lot of churches are doing to help people sort of restore their relationship with God.
To rediscover it, if you will.
To rediscover. Exactly. I think there are a lot of churches out there that are really focused on that are churches for the spiritual refugees, if you will. There are churches for the outcasts. That are churches for people who don't like church. I was at a convention a couple of years ago, and a fellow was interested in buying the Spockology book, and I mentioned the Gospel According to Star Trek book, and he goes, "Oh, I don't think you want to sell me that book." He said, "I live in some southern state or whatever." He's like, "I'm surrounded by all this, religious stuff, and these people." And he says, "So I hear the word gospel and I just go bleh." And I said, "Well, I wrote this book for people who, when they hear the word gospel, go bleh." And he said, "So how much if I buy both?" And I hope that some of the work that we're doing here can be that, because it is important. It is important to find goodness, truth, and beauty anywhere we can find it, because all goodness is God's goodness, all truth is God's truth, and all beauty is God's beauty. And those things will lead us home. Those things will help us rediscover ourselves, our roots, our history, and our future.
Even if it's not where we think it is.
Yes.
As you're talking about all this, I keep wanting to add that, sometimes home isn't where we think it is. Mm-hmm. But I can't think of a way to tie that into Star Trek.
Home isn't where we think it is. Let me think for a second here. Well, I think that really comes down to the Star Trek ethic and the Star Trek theme of chosen family. I think that's one thing that we see echoed in every Star Trek series. People finding home really in one another. People finding home in places where they might not have thought they would have a place or belong. I think of Ro Laren in TNG, and she eventually did not stay, but she was able to find herself through that process. And we kind of expected that she would stay on the Enterprise, but she didn't. She went back to the fight. As opposed to the character she was supposed to become, which is Kira Nerys in
Right.
Deep Space Nine, right? And
Yeah.
Nerys does find her home with Sisko and with the Federation, with the Starfleet. Even though she never joins Starfleet, even though she's an alien, and has a very different philosophy a lot of times from Ben and from others who are around her, she becomes family with them, and she finds her home. How in the world is it that all of these people from all these different alien cultures and these people from the Federation find their home in an abandoned Cardassian space station? What is that? How does that happen?
It makes me think of the expression "home is where the heart is." Mm-hmm. The intention is your home is where your heart is, but I think that sometimes you can make your home where your heart is. And like with Deep Space Nine, their hearts were there, and so that became their home.
Right. It's not that you necessarily have to go to your actual like physical home or whatever to find your heart.
Right.
It's that wherever your heart is, that's your home. It reminds me of the words of Jesus, wherever your heart is, wherever your treasure is, there is your heart. Right? Mm-hmm. That you value above all things. That when you wake up, when somebody shakes you in the middle of the night and says, "What makes you happy?" You know? Whatever comes out of your mouth, that's where your heart is. And how are our hearts oriented? And are they oriented in places where they should be? And can we reorient them? Yes, we can. But also sometimes we can get some outside voices that will tell us that where our hearts will take us, Enterprise, we're just going all over the franchise today. Yeah. That where our hearts will take us is not where we should go, you know, and make us question ourselves. But really, ultimately, we find, no, this is what makes me happy. No, this is my joy. This is my calling. This is my purpose. You know, I came back to Star Trek after walking away from it. And I've tried to like, to find, you know, like, does this make sense? You know, that my calling is to like talk about Star Trek and Jesus. I mean, yeah, that's what I want to do, but like, that's my calling. Like, yeah, it is. I mean, it's not my whole calling, but it's definitely a big part of it. Mm-hmm. And so learning to figure that out, I mean, that takes discernment, and that's something that we have to trust God to give us and help us with. But we can cultivate that. And yeah, where your treasure is, there's your heart, and you know, home is where the heart is. All that, yeah, it's absolutely right. So home is a really, it can be a difficult thing to find, but we can find it. We can rediscover that country that we might have left. Rediscover, even if we're just rediscovering a sense of belonging in a whole new place, you know, like when I was away from churches for years, and I finally walked into the door of a place that was dark and candlelit, and where people were welcoming and warm, and there was beautiful music playing, and I just said, "Oh, I'm home. Like, this is a kind of space where I belong. This is what speaks to me. I've been to all kinds of different places, done all kinds of different things, and I keep coming back to this. This is home. This is where I belong." It was a place I'd never been before. Never walked in the door. But when I did walk in the door, I rediscovered a part of myself. And that's a beautiful thing. And it can happen where you least expect it. So, yeah. Keep searching and search in hope. It can get really discouraging. It can get really discouraging to feel like you haven't found your place. And you haven't found your people. Keep reaching out. Relationship is risk. Love is risk. Yeah, you're going to find hurt when you open yourself to other people. That's going to happen. Even when you find the right people, you're still going to find ways to hurt each other. That's vulnerability. But vulnerability is strength. And when we're weak, then we're made strong. You will find it. You will find your locus. Even if you've been a locutus. Playing fast and loose with the Latin there. But anyway. How's that?
That's good.
Does that cover it?
Yeah, I think that's all that can possibly ever be said on the topic.
Oh yeah, we've covered it. We're done.
We've covered it. No one else ever can.
Nobody else can do it.
Add to that conversation.
Yep.
So today's question is an interesting one. One of our listeners wants to know, or maybe they want to know our opinion.
Yeah.
Does TOS, the original series, does TOS fall short when it comes to peacemaking? I'm not sure what episode of our podcast or of Discovery this was in relation to, but talking more about TOS.
Well, I know I had mentioned, we talked about peacemaking, I think last episode. I mentioned like The Perils of Peacemaking, that documentary on this Star Trek 6 DVD.
Okay.
Which I tried to find online and link for everybody, and I couldn't do it. But I couldn't find it. But anyway, yeah, okay. Does the original series fall short? I see. My question back to them would be, why are you asking this question?
Right. Well, and I think it's because Kirk has such a reputation for firing from the hip, shoot first, ask questions later sort of diplomacy. He is often contrasted with Picard, who's seen as the master of diplomacy, right?
Right. But how much of that is actual action and how much of that is temperament?
Right.
I don't really
because
know.
I like just rewatching Let That Be Your Last Battlefield the other day when we were discussing getting ready for one of our previous episodes. He seems to be making a valid attempt at peacemaking, right? It's his instinct isn't to shoot first and ask questions later. It's to try and bring these two people together to help them understand their differences and what their antagonism is going to cause.
And he has a forceful, sort of blusterous way of doing that.
Right.
I feel like there's kind of an impatience that Picard has when people from another time are on the ship and they're confused by the future stuff, which annoys me because I'm like, dude, have a little compassion. But Kirk gets annoyed really quickly and to a high degree with people who don't think like he does. And it's kind of like he's angry with you for not being at peace with one another. And so he's got a forceful way. I always go back to Cat's Paw. When the fella's like, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, a fortune for each of you if you leave this place, and he says, these mean nothing to us. We can manufacture a ton of them on our ship. And the guy says, valueless? Why, I read. And then Kirk just interrupts him and says, whatever you read it wrong. It's like, it's not the Picard way is like, well, yes, centuries ago. And then, we might have said that. But then Kirk is just like, yeah, not only are you wrong, but it's because of how you read it. You couldn't possibly have gotten any information that's outdated or anything like that. We can't give you the benefit of the doubt. So he has that impatience. And I think I've probably said that on a previous episode before. It's one of my favorite Kirk anecdotes. But anyway, he has that reputation, but I don't know how much he really falls short in terms of actually getting people to make peace or making peace with people. I think of the Corbomite maneuver, which, by the way, was the first episode of Star Trek I showed my son. If you're looking for an introductory episode to Star Trek, the original series, I recommend the Corbomite maneuver. I think it's the most classic thing you can possibly.
That's the one where he's like, we have this Corbomite on board that will destroy everything, right?
Yeah, with Baylock, right?
Yeah.
Which is great. But the point is, in that episode, I mean, he's working very hard to not attack and to not be. I mean, they do fire at the ship and stuff, but he's very, very restrained, and I think we see that again and again and again with Kirk, that he does have that forcefulness and that bluster and that desire to kind of want to punch you in the face, but he also has the self-discipline to pull back from it. And so I think if we're assuming that we're sort of orbiting Kirk in this question as to why original series falls short in peacemaking, that could be it. Of course, the other thing is it could fall short in terms of showing the process of peacemaking, because we always just sort of like give people a resolution or give people the tools and then fly off, and we don't see how things progress on that planet the way we do on like Deep Space Nine or Discovery or things like that.
Right.
So you could say it falls short in that regard. Sure. By not really.
From the show itself.
Right. In terms of the storytelling, like we just don't get to see that process played out. And it feels like, you can wrap it up with one impassioned Kirk speech and everything will be okay, right? And of course, Star Trek 2 tells us, no, that's not the case. Kirk can come up with his Kirk solution and then it can backfire on him 15 years later and nearly kill everybody. So there's that. But within the series itself, that could, but that's a limitation of the type of storytelling that we're dealing with and the strict rules of the series at that time, where we just couldn't continue stories on to different episodes, except in the case of the Menagerie, where we're just desperate to use old footage to make episodes because we're out of money. But anyway, all that to say, I don't know. I would really be interested in sort of going through some of those other peacemaking episodes. And a lot of times you find, like you have a Private Little War, and you have a lot of times you find that they're encountering these planets that really are kind of at war with themselves. One part of their culture is oppressing another part of their culture. I mean, that's even true in the one you mentioned, Let There Be a Last Battlefield. Or even A Piece of the Action, right? A Piece of the Action is about gang war, and Kirk and Spock sort of turning gangland culture on its ear in order to achieve their goals, right? And to bring greater peace and all that. So I don't know. I don't know that it does fall short. All Star Trek series fall short at some point of something. It's hard to say something broadly about them. But I think there are ways in which it does. There are ways in which it might have a reputation, or Kirk might have a reputation that might not be earned by the actual facts on the ground. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. That's the best I can do with it.
Sounds good.
That's good. And I need to say one thing before we end this show. This is the most important thing I will say this episode. I made a huge mistake last episode, and I need to do a major mea culpa here and ask my audience's forgiveness. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what is wrong with me. Please forgive me. I said there was only one dog in Star Trek. And there is one dog who felt very left out, and that is Porthos.
Yes, Captain Archer's beagle.
I went straight for number one because I love number one, and he's new in my life. Porthos, the dog of Star Trek. Number one is great, but he's only been in 12. He wasn't even 12. He was in 3 episodes at most of Picard. Porthos is a major character in Enterprise.
Porthos has been to the Beyond and back.
He has. Porthos is the heart and soul of Enterprise. I mean, let's be honest. He's the anchor. He's the glue that holds that crew together. Porthos is everything. So please forgive me, Enterprise fans. And also...
if it weren't for Porthos...
Yes.
Why do I have a hard time saying that name? If it weren't for Porthos, Scotty would not have been... sent
Marooned
off
on
to
Delta
that
Vega.
ice planet, and
That's
would
right.
not have come across Spock. And
Porthos had a hand in fate, sir.
yes,
Destiny was achieved by a beagle. God bless him. We love Porthos. But I would also be remiss if I did not mention Star Trek's other dog, the dog from Lower Decks, the dog that Tendi creates. Oh. The dog.
That's fair. Yeah.
I was trying to remember the dog's name, and I was looking it up on Memory Alpha, and I went, "Oh yeah, the dog."
There's a John Wayne film where he's got a dog, and the dog's name is just Dog.
Oh yeah. Well, and there's also a series which I really like. My son really likes it, called Milo Murphy's Law, and they have a dog who has the best name in the world. The dog's name is DOG. DOG. I love it. You have to pronounce it right. It's DOG, but I love it. Anyway.
That's clever.
All right. There we go. So, I hope I attained absolution with that moment. Yeah. So, Tim.
Yeah, you would hate to be out in the doghouse.
I was in the doghouse for a week. I'll tell you what. Oh boy. Porthos was haunting my dreams, man. But anyway, so I think that's good. Tim, what do we have coming up next week?
Well, next week we will be covering the 9th episode of Discovery Season 3, Terra Firma Part 1, and see what comes up.
It'll be interesting. We have another Part 1. We've had a Part 3 where the Part 2s were Part 1 and 2 were 30 years ago. We had a Part 1 that hasn't had a Part 2 yet.
Right.
This Part 1 will probably have a Part 2 like in Strange New Worlds or something. Who knows? But
or
I'm
they're
excited.
going to go back and make another TNG episode and call it Part 2.
Right, there you go.
Or an episode of Picard, maybe.
Right. Oh, there you go. Ooh, that'd be cool.
Ooh,
Wow.
That would be cool.
Oh,
I'm waiting for it to connect somehow. I still think there's going to be a connection.
Well, there was with the Warrior Nun.
Well,
thing.
yeah.
A greater connection would be cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're in different centuries, but still.
I know.
Well, good. Well, that's I'm excited about it. That's very cool. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure everybody at home is looking forward to it as well. In the meantime, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and also send us your questions. Gospel According to Star Trek on Twitter and Facebook, or gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would absolutely love discussing your questions on the show. Please send us more. Tim, do you have anything else to say to the folks at home?
I hope this episode has been as healing for you as it has for me.
That is the sweetest thing I've heard all day. That makes me so happy, and I hope I hope the same for everybody at home. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and until next time.
I'm Tim Van Orden.
And I'm Kevin Sinise, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper.
See you next time.